Hello, I'm Andy Schmuckler, author of videos and a website titled A Better Human Story. And I've been thinking about revenge for a variety of reasons, which I'll go through a couple of things which bring me to thinking about it because together they sort of indicate how central a thing it is for us to be looking at, both in a larger historical way, but in particular at this moment in American history. I just finished watching a movie called Shooter, um, which is like a whole lot of movies, a revenge story. There's a whole lot of killing that our one protagonist does that we take satisfaction in because they done him wrong in a variety of ways. And let me say, this is a reflection on me because I'd seen that movie before, and yet I chose once again to watch it. I DVR things and then I watch them bit by bit, and it fills a place in my vicarious imaginary life where I have a bunch of movies, and one of the places I get a lot of pleasure out of visiting is one where you have a good revenge drama. Uh, I won't try to figure out what the list should look like, but I expect everybody could make a list. I think of the Jason Bourne movies as also being of that kind. I mean, we feel like he's such an innocent guy who's just trying to, but then the system's coming after him. And we got the same thing here with the guy in Shooter, who's been betrayed by the American government and some of its representatives in a couple of major ways. Who gets revenge? And, it's very severe revenge. So why do I watch it? One thing that occurs to me is that I've been trained to get gratification. I grew up watching Westerns, for example. How many times is the plot that early on in the action, our protagonist, the guy we identify with, is done wrong, or the people he wants to protect have been done wrong, and we see these people, heroes, are often like Shane. They come in and they protect the innocent, and at the end of the story, the bad guys are lying dead in the street, and we showed them. It's very gratifying. I grew up on that stuff. Not to mention all the World War II movies where the movie shows us how evil the Nazis are, or then we get the gratification that our guys run over them. So part of it may be that I'm gratified by stuff that I was taught how to get a lot of pleasure out of. And then that sort of utilizes something which is probably more organic and built into the creature. We're more or less wired to have an impulse to hit back if we're hit. That the blow makes us angry and readies us for combat. If we've got that kind of spirit in us, one's just to shrink or run away. We love to have heroes who don't take it lying down, and that might be well built into us to a degree. But if you think of partly it's inborn. You hurt me, I want to strike back at you. And partly the culture cultivates it with its many stories of revenge. I don't know what proportion is what, but we can see that it can be to a lesser or a greater degree. We can see it, for example, because we now have a president of the United States that is so much more driven by vengeful passions than any political leader that we've ever seen. I mean, he is almost. I kind of wonder if he's even able to control his desire to strike back. It may well be that there's a compulsion involved there with Trump because he makes so much out of things that nobody else would have made anything of. Like if a pollster in Iowa paints a picture that he's not in such good shape, as it turns out that he probably was, he's got to get revenge on that person. If people who are professionals in the Department of Justice are assigned a job and they do their job like they're supposed to do, in keeping with their oath and in keeping with their duties, he's going to get, and they go off and investigate him and work on the prosecution of him, he's going to get revenge. If he thinks that CBS has interviewed his opponent, Kamala Harris, in a way that was advantageous to her, he can't just let that sit. He's going to get back at them. And he's actually been very explicit about his belief in revenge. He's been explicit that he rejects the idea that Jesus enunciated, that if somebody strikes you on one cheek, you turn the other cheek. And well, that's one of the major spiritual lines of Christian teaching, of turning the other cheek. Trump said explicitly some years ago, on the contrary, if somebody hits him once, he's going to hit back tenfold. So that kind of is a clue, in a way, to why the idea of revenge needs to be looked at, because it's a problem. When the person who's held up by Western civilization as the best, most perfect human being ever, Jesus, Son of God, the perfect person, according to a lot of the teachings, if he says, don't take revenge, turn the other cheek. And if Donald Trump, who is, my honest opinion, the most deeply flawed, defective, destructive person that I've ever seen, though I've studied some from a distance that have been hugely destructive people too. I studied the lives of Hitler and Stalin, but Trump really is, in, I think, fundamental ways, quite demonstrably, by almost all of our standards, one of the worst human beings we've ever seen. And if he is aligned with vengeance is really important, in fact, so important that one is maybe even compelled without much reflection to strike back, that should be a clue about how revenge is not part of how to make the world a better place, how it's really a way of perpetuating the brokenness in the world. In other words, in the battle between good and evil, which I claim are reasonable terms but not to go there, but just to say, in the battle to make a better world, revenge helps the worst world forces to prevail. That is a clue to that, and another reason I would be thinking about revenge is that I've been trying in a series of essays and videos to show the reality of evil, which I define as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse or more broken. And I try to show that I think I do show that you can see a force that's spreading brokenness, because if you look at the causes of some form of brokenness, of war, hatred, greed, whatever, and you find that it's the product of other forms of brokenness. How do you get to be that way? This other brokenness produced it. And then what are the consequences of its being broken that way? You can see that each of these things, a war or the greed, may have impacts on the wider world to generate other forms of brokenness. That's what I've been trying to show. And gee, what better way of representing how brokenness begets brokenness than revenge. Something bad was done to our hero, and then our hero makes things supposedly right by doing something bad to whoever inflicted that. And as Gandhi said, it's a cycling process. It doesn't lead to something good in the world. He says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And before long, you've got a blind and toothless world. And that shows how the destructiveness perpetuates itself through the medium of the means of revenge. So you get the Hatfields and the McCoys, each one of whom inflicts on the other some kind of wound that the other feels it must avenge, and there is no end to it, which is the definition of a feud, I guess, is that it's a perpetual cycle of revenge. So we can see that brokenness begets brokenness is parallel to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which is one of the rationales that comes up in a biblical kind of a way for revenge, like dealing with criminals to achieve revenge, which is a major component of our criminal system, unfortunately, that justice and revenge are considered to be the same thing. But from a larger systemic perspective, revenge means a world at war. And a world at war is a world that can't get people together to make things better. So if we are in a drama, which we are as a species, about whether the forces of destruction or the forces within human civilization that are pushing in a direction that might make human civilization viable on this planet and help the sentient creatures, human and otherwise, to thrive and find fulfillment in life rather than suffer and find misery. Well, if that's the choice of our possible futures as a human civilization, revenge is one of the tools of the forces of destruction. And the forces of wholeness are teachers of overcoming that tendency in human beings, which is widespread, not confined to Americans by a long shot. Whole categories of European drama in, what was it, the 17th century, like in Spain, they're called revenge plays. This is an old thing, and it's a way in which the wounds suffered lead to wounds inflicted, and there is no end to it, unless you get some of the more whole teachings operating, like the wholeness of love thine enemies, which is asking a lot in a world where there's a war of all against all. But at least the wholeness of, for example, the Allies after World War II not making the same mistakes as the Allies after World War I, where contrary to what Woodrow Wilson was hoping to achieve, a really vindictive peace was put together, which led to World War II and to the step forward of the victorious allies of the West, and particularly the United States, with Roosevelt and George Marshall and Truman, dealing with people that you might seek revenge against, instead in ways to try to bring them back into a more whole world, in a more whole form. The dealing with post-World War II Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan was one of the great achievements of human beings. It did not seek revenge to any great degree. And the world moved forward. So, in terms of my own desires for revenge, that I infer from how much gratification I get from watching a good movie that gives me that, I still like to watch Westerns. I still like to watch World War II movies. And I still like to watch some of these fantasies about people getting wronged and then making everything right. But I'm uncomfortable with the way that the contemporary revenge plays seem to take place outside of any much of a moral framework. Or to put it a different way, the hero takes it upon himself to be judge, jury, and executioner, to operate completely without reference to the larger world. And I see some of these shows that are made these days as feeding the form of vindictiveness that's not righteous, like Shane in the Western, where the wicked rancher who's driving the good farmers off their land through his superior force end up having to pay because our hero protected the innocent against the guilty. Here, there is elements of that all the time, but there is no reference to what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. The hero in The Shooter and in all of these other ones, the overarching political authority is given no authority, no weight. He's on his own against. How many times have we been enacted that the government is actually the problem? So there isn't any established order that these militia types feel obliged to obey because they think the whole thing is the deep state and CIA people who betray the country and who pretend to be interested in something having to do with national values, but are really only serving these other things. It's a very deep and dark picture that these revenge plays show. And I think it prepares people in MAGA America to think that the insurrectionists who took the law into their own hands were okay. All you got to do is believe the big lie, and then all of a sudden it becomes okay not to go to court, but to just do what our heroes do, which is to move through the world wielding force as effectively as possible to defeat the oppressor. So there's a little bit of a guilty conscience that I feel when I take my vengeful pleasures. I also think that when brokenness begets brokenness, and I ask, why would people at this time be inclined to elect somebody like Donald Trump, who is so vindictive, in so unbecoming a way, so unbecoming of a president of the United States? I mean, it shouldn't be the case that that somebody like Bezos, owning the Washington Post, would reasonably fear that Trump would try to punish him if he let that endorsement get published. That's not okay. It's not okay that he capitulated to it, but it's also not okay that we've entered into a situation where power and vindictiveness have been brought together into the one man who's the president of the United States. And it's going to be helpful in advancing all kinds of brokenness in this world. I mean, it compromises the free press, for example, as we've seen. It'll probably compromise free enterprise as well, as there are rewards and punishments meted out by this side where the leader, the guy calling the shots, has got this huge need for vengeance. Have a problem as a civilization about bringing this force of destruction under control. A force, a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse, and it does that by utilizing the fact that brokenness begets brokenness to move things in broken directions, in broken, different shape-shifting ways as things move through time. A force of evil, and for which revenge is the perfect tool. So if we want the good to triumph over the evil in this world, well, there's a lot we got to do. I mean, we got a lot to do probably to diminish people's need for revenge, which in the contemporary picture, I would guess that the movies have contributed to that as part of a general propagandistic effort to convey to a whole lot of people that they have been injured by a whole lot of things which are not really the heart of the problem. I mean, the Biden crime family stole an election. Well, they didn't. But if you thought they did, you would really want to get revenge. And then what makes the brokenness that makes people vulnerable to that also is the sense that a lot of people grow up with having that they were injured. The very process of their upbringing was at some level injurious in a way that made them want to strike back, but probably were forbidden. I think that there are some traditional ways of bringing up children that are injurious in just that way, and that instill in people some forbidden impulses to strike back. And if you can't strike back at the authorities, which is what brings you up, if you got to respect and agree with and march along with everything that gets laid down, then whatever injuries there are there, you need to displace that sense of having been wronged into, well, it wasn't those people who actually have injured me, but it was the immigrants or the blacks or the Jews. And having been wronged by that kind of a out there force, people get turned into good foot soldiers in a political force that's run by a force of brokenness. The more people have unexpressed needs to get revenge and are lied to about who the source of their unhappiness is, like the corporate system has done a whole lot more to damage the Americans in the bottom half of the economic ladder than immigrants. You cultivate a sense of having been wronged, and you direct it against a target that serves the manipulative, deceptive force of destruction that is typical of fascism. I mean, Putin's lies, the whole idea of a big lie originated with Hitler and his regime. Scapegoating, getting revenge against. So much of the evil of the world works through all of this stuff. So I'm going to keep an eye on my own vengeful impulses. I don't like the idea of taking things lying down either. The idea that evil will be allowed to triumph over good is unacceptable to me. But there is a ethic about setting things right that is not about revenge. It's not about wanting bad people to suffer. It's about doing whatever can be done so that the force of brokenness utilizes revenge, as among other things, not be able to shape the human future. Turning the other cheek, forgiving, are ways of draining the human world of some of its destructive force. So that's part of the challenge. I am interested in the ways in which our civilization has shaped us. In some ways that are suboptimal, and this may be one of them. Another one that I look at is something I find in myself when I watch football games. There is something in me that has gotten trained since I was a boy in a kind of a tribal us against them set of passions. All I got to do is turn on some NFL game I'm watching. Within 5 minutes, there's a part of me which will have attached, not every time, but almost every time, will have attached to one of these teams and will begin to see the action in terms of my desire for my side to prevail over their side. So what would have been a great tackle if I was identifying with the defensive team would have been, he got him, seen with regret. When the running back for the other team breaks through, I'm looking to see how the defenders can bring him down. When my team has a running back that breaks through, like Saquon Barkley, I'm all identified with him. I take huge pleasure in how he splits the defense, how he fakes out the defense, how he out sprints the defense all the way to the end zone. That stuff goes way back for me, and I think for a whole lot of people. And one of the questions I have is whether that's how much of that is inborn, that us against them thing, taking pleasure in the triumph of our side over the other side, and how much of that has been trained in when, during the course of civilization. And I'm guessing that the extent to which we feel that in America in these times, and judging from the World Soccer Cup stuff, a lot of other nations can get really passionately involved also. I'm guessing that that's more than half is inculcated and magnified by the way that the cultures teach us. I remember high school, we would have these days of pep rallies and such for a big football game. People would wear the school colors, and we have a song that we all sing together, the fight song, which in my high school's case was the University of Michigan, dun, 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 but it was changing the words for my high school. those are really exciting times. And if you go through enough of those experiences, going to Michigan State football games with my father when I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and they were the best college football team in the country in the early 50s. And then being part of the high school that was celebrating itself in that competitive arena in the way that it was. I think that we do magnify that a lot. And so when we get to the Olympics, I think few of us have a big ability, as good an ability to get into this is humanity showing what it can do, and rather identifying with the American in this heat, and watching the finals to see whether the American can get a medal. There's a lot of training that goes on in a culture. A lot of it's invisible to us, I expect. I mean, I'm just starting to think about problems like teaching us revenge and teaching us to think about how important it is that we defeat them. But it's an interesting question about whether they're. I think these are clues to how the selection for power, which is my basic foundational idea, selects for cultures that train people in certain passions, magnifying them, so that if the enemy strikes, they want to strike back. In World War II, there was a whole lot of revenge energy about who against the country that had bombed Pearl Harbor, for example. That there's a selective process, and societies that are successful in generating the kind of school spirit that sings a fight song are more likely to prevail in the war of all against all that the rise of civilization implies. So this whole revenge thing fits with just about everything. And I've sown some of those connections rather quickly, but I hope it comes through that revenge poses the challenge facing us in one of the meaningful ways. And it's worth taking a look at, and it's worth making sure that we do not have a really vindictive person ever wielding the powers of the presidency like we do right now. Andy Schmuckler, my website's abetterhumanstory.org. Thank you for listening. I really mean that. I appreciate those of you who are listening in on my efforts to show something worth seeing. Thank you.